Um,
So Jim,
anyway, I'll go from here. um, so women in the workforce, the pandemic has really wreaked havoc on all employees, as we were just talking about, and how it's changing lifestyle. But clearly, you can see the dynamics playing out very much for women in the workforce as well. And just to give you a sense, in the latest unemployment report that came out, we had about 370,000 men enter the workforce and about 165,000 women left in the April report. So not exactly an ideal setup for where we are, but really reflective of the pandemic period where obviously COVID's been a strain on all employees, but it's certainly creating burnout, whether it's you have to always be on. The work hours seem longer when you're working on a remote basis, and it's creating a lot of challenges. And for working mothers, that actually takes their double shift work of working a job and then doing the caregiving for the family. It's actually lengthened out their days, which is somewhat hard to believe from when you think about where we were. And it's creating an issue where, because of the burnout and the challenges, more women are likely to leave the workforce than or be furloughed, which is creating even bigger problems. And it goes back to the support systems have been inadequate for a long time. And it was highlighted by the pandemic when the schools closed and their childcare options went away. It created even greater strains. So wanted to take a little bit globally and then get more to the US, but this is a snapshot of global labor force participation between 95 and 2020. And that in that 25-year period, while there's been lower labor force participation, a lot of that brought about by the pandemic, you've seen the gap remain pretty steady between men and women. I think this is setting up a pretty significant demographic time bomb in that women are over 50% of the global population, and we need them to be active in the workforce to deal with the issues that we have coming out of this, because one of the key issues is growing GDP so that we can and finance all the needs that we have globally. So this is a big issue. We have to close this gap, and we have to figure out ways to allow them to be in the workforce better. So I just want to take a minute and talk about the pandemic and the challenge on a global and US basis. And, clearly we had a lot of problems with women in the workforce pre-COVID. Post-COVID, it's actually highlighted the two that I just mentioned. When schools close and childcare goes away, it creates bigger problems, but the problems are much deeper than just the care needs. It gets into issues that have been going on for decades, and we have to deal with that. But what is clear that the pandemic has disproportionately hurt women, particularly working women, and women of color and other minorities have been impacted more negatively. And the other thing that's been going on around the rest of the world is these job retention strategies where we're paying companies to keep people employed are actually masking the effects of a long-term issue that we think is going to come back in a big way. The other thing that's should be clear to a lot of people, and it should have been clear before, but it often takes a crisis, is we're learning the value of the unpaid work done by women, particularly working mothers, and what they're doing. But it's not just working mothers, it's any mothers and what they do to allow the system to operate very efficiently. But we do have a reduction of women in the labor force, and labor force participation rates are coming down, as we just showed. But more are likely going to be forced to leave or reduce their hours if companies don't adjust to the needs that exist and work kind of in a more flexible way. But I think the big issue, and one that doesn't get talked about enough because we're so short-term oriented, is the longer-term economic impacts and the scarring that we think is going to exist. When you have people leaving the workforce in a way that they are, or downsizing positions because they need to, rather than a system being able to support them, that is going to create long-term issues. And we have a a demographic time bomb, as I mentioned, that if we don't figure out ways to keep women in the workforce in a way that is productive and not creating greater strains and burnout, we're going to have some significant long-term problems. So we also think that's going to impact global GDP if we don't get this right. And because of the damage that's been done, we're going to have to see OECD nations work improve at twice the pre-pandemic rate by 2030 to recover from the damage done. So that's a massive change that has to be made. I think this is really important, that you have to really have a mindset change that's more significant. So I think some of the policies being put forth in the human infrastructure programs make sense from this, but I think what they do is they do a one-size-fits-all instead of being much more targeted. So I think we have to really rethink a lot of the policies that are done, and whether that's on a corporate level and a government level, we have to really make some changes, and now's the time. So this is another look, and I apologize for my chart because the top 5 are brackets of the participation by sex and by household segment. The bottom ones are women. And what's really interesting, I think, is the participation rates of women who are one-person family units versus women who are lone parents, and the drop in labor force participation. I think these bottom 2 here are going to be the ones that have the most negative impact coming out of COVID, as opposed to the women who are part of couples or couples with children. So I think this is an area that we really have to focus on. And I think the problem with the policies being thrown around and the money being thrown around today is it's not targeted enough. And I think we really have to get much more targeted about support and relief in governments around the world, not just the US. But this is a fascinating study that was done by the OECD, and it's looked at the progress made from 2011 to 2019. And then it looked at how long it's going to take to achieve parity. So labor force participation rates for females improving, it's going to take 22 years. Closing the participation rate gap, 24 years. Gender pay gap, 112 years. Some of these are just internal policies that companies can make to fix the problem. Getting full-time female participation to be the same as males, it's going to take 60 years. We have to do a better job here. And it starts with companies and governments to lead the way. So shifting to the US, I want to focus on a couple of areas. And just to give you a sense of scale, so the civilian labor force in the US is about 161 million people employed. It's about 151 million, of which about 82 million are men over age 20. And for women, it's about 73 million over age 20, with women unemployed at about 4.4 million and change. What's interesting is today, or the last couple of days, there's been a new JOLTS report, job openings report, and that's showing we have 8.1 million openings. So there's plenty of jobs, but there is some serious mismatches that we have to deal with to solve this problem. Looking at it at another cut by ethnicity, you can clearly see the gaps in African American, Blacks, and Latino communities, and the shortfall there. And we have to do more to deal with these challenges, both on a wages and also on an employment level. If you look by occupational groups, one of the big challenges has been that there's been a lot of disparity in the service sectors, and that's where a lot of female employees tend to work, and those have been areas that have been hard hit. Ironically, the areas that are high growth are not well represented by women yet, and that's going to take a mindset shift that we have to make to get us there. So I just want to touch on that last point for a minute, if I could, and give you some statistics that I came across doing the research here. So as a result of remote work, 4 out of 5 female employees feel their prospects for promotion have been hurt or worsened in the remote work environment. 45% of women leaders feel that that women employees are not being heard the way they would be in a remote environment as they would be in an office environment. And 1 in 5 women feel that they're ignored on conference calls that are done on a remote basis. So the mindset has to change there, and we have to do a better job of, 1, being aware of the issue, more aware of the issue, and 2, acting on it. There are other key challenges that I want to touch on, and this gets into skills and where women focus their education on. But just to give you a sense, in key emerging areas, the representation of female employees is way too low, particularly given that they're over half the workforce or about half the workforce. So in cloud roles, 12% are women. In engineering, 15% are women. In data and AI, 26% are women. They're about 75% of the healthcare area, but in very few leadership roles in that segment as well. So you can just see, these are just a couple of the statistics. Pandemics is worsened the problem considerably, but we need to make some mindset changes. And I would say the 2 key areas are, 1, for corporations to really rethink how they're supporting women in the workforce, particularly on a remote basis right now. It's going to be very hard to, as we're going through this discussion that we had before we started this, of what age groups want to work where and how that's going to work. If all the over 40s are working remote, how do the young people get the expertise and the wisdom that comes from partnering with those people if the older people are working on a remote basis and the young people are in the office? That change is real, and I'm experiencing this with our own company. We've hired 3 recent young women out of college for entry-level roles, and they so much want to be a part of the daily flow, but we're working on it. We've been remote for over a year and aren't planning on going back in a material way until after Labor Day, and more likely October 1st. So we're working extra hard to try and figure out ways to make them feel more incorporated, but we're actually probably going to do single-day visits to the office to deal with this, just to get through this problem. So we think there's a lot of things companies can do. We think there's things that government should do, but it really is going to take a mindset change. But it also gets into education and reskilling. And for companies that talk about reskilling, and we've written about it, I've talked about this for over a year on these conference calls, and I realized in the last couple of weeks that we haven't done enough inside our company to do reskilling for our own employees. So we're actually making a change where we're creating a weekly program where we're going to have skills training on things that matter to help people get acclimated to the workforce. We've also done something for remote work that was interesting, and it came from the people with kids who are working from home right after we went remote. After the first month, they realized that their kids had different expectations of their parents working at home than maybe I did as an employer. And I realized that the strain and the pull from your family members required us to do something different. So we actually added 2 free days a month so that they could have family days. And the feedback was actually interesting, because there was not just the working mothers, but the fathers that were back home and working in a home environment where they didn't have that responsibility before were being pulled into it. So the free days and the family days actually helped deal with that transition. I think there's a lot of smart things companies are doing that can be shared, and I'm really looking forward to the future of female discussion coming up next, because with 50% of the workforce, we have to do a better job of normalizing things and equalizing things so that we can have the GDP growth we need to deal with all the serious problems that exist in society today. So Mark, a little too long, I'll stop there and turn it over to the group.
Never too long, Stephen. What are the thoughts, questions?
Oh my God. I got 20 people working for me. I think 15 or 16 of those are women. We are in Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, Nova Scotia, the Netherlands, and India, and Baltimore. We are all working remotely. They're all young folks. They're all engineers, computer science, all those kinds of folks. And so, Stephen, I am telling you, virtual works as good, if not better. You need to set up your tools. You need to have, we're using Discord as our basic communication things, and people just sit there and we have a Discord coffee room so people can come online. We're
But
using
let's-
GitLab to upload and download.
You have a question, Zale, or is that just a commentary?
Well, I'm trying to tell you that, Stephen, it's faster moving and it's happening now. And I'm just telling you that it can happen and any company can do it.
Yeah, I think one of the differences is how do the older companies as opposed to the newer companies transition? Because that's where the bulk of the jobs are going to be in older economy companies that have to make the transition. I do think it's easier for smaller and newer companies to do it, but and it's not that it can't be done. I think there's a mindset change that has to.
Dinosaurs
occur.
die. Dinosaurs die.
I don't disagree with that either.
That's
Other
going to
questions?
come up. That's going to come up actually in what I'm going to talk about, that dinosaurs die comment, because what we're seeing is this impetus from very well educated women from the more developed emerging economies that by and large get more degrees in engineering, mathematics, and other male-oriented subjects previously that are flourishing and very ambitious. And so the sort of dipping area for finding these women or finding these people is certainly in some of these emerging economies, whether it's the Middle East or whether it's Russia, for example, or India. India has more engineers, 10 times more engineers than Germany.
Which is interesting because then it gets into immigration policies and how you're handling skilled labor and the like, and how many countries need to get that right that have it wrong right now is another issue.
Yeah.
Other
I also
comments?
think the other thing that I came across and I'm interested to hear from the panelists next is that where one of the big challenges is in the entry-level management roles. Women are grossly underrepresented there, and that's an area that big companies have to focus on making some change in. Because if you can't get into the entry management level roles, it's hard to get those advancements up. And again, that's a bigger company challenge than a smaller company challenge.
Stephen, you just killed my presentation. That was my whole punchline.
I'm sorry, Denise.
I'm kidding, but you're totally right. You're absolutely spot on with that idea.
I mean, are we violently agreeing, but parts of the world, parts of corporate America do not? What are we?
I don't have a comment on whether female engineers versus male engineers, but I did spend a lot of time once with a Chinese engineer who moved to the United States and then worked in banking and finance and had a successful career. And I asked him why there were so many more engineers in China than in the United States. And he said, because all of our parents forced us to become engineers, that we're not allowed to choose English or literature or poetry or something else. There's a huge societal pressure. He said, I didn't want to be an engineer. Most of my friends didn't want to be engineers, but we felt like we had to be. So there's a lot of, I don't want to be engineers coming out of Asia that are engineers. Something to keep in mind.
And you'll see that, carrying that on, Andrew, you'll see that in South Africa, for example, where the go-to degree, where just enormous amounts of people have degrees in accountancy. Accountancy is a very popular degree for men particularly, but men and women in South Africa. And finance also in Russia, just as engineering is in India and as engineering is in China.
Other comments, questions?
Won't disagree on the accountancy for South Africans. Up the net first end.
Stephen,
Yes.
you were talking about all these industries where women are underrepresented. Where are they actually now? If they're not if they're not in tech, what industries are the women, mostly crowded in, so to speak.
Well, healthcare was one of them, but a lot of the service industries are where they've been working in, and those, it depends on the industry, obviously, but they tend not to be the higher paying jobs either. So that's part.
I was going to say, do you think that that has something to do with, you could say, the perceived attractiveness of these industries for especially people in the workforce? You know, the fact that they're concentrated in, you know, healthcare, you know, food service, these kind of things. Does that reflect? Would that be a kind of a reflection on how attractive or not attractive these jobs are in general?
I think there's an element of that. I also think there's an element of, if you want to go in the areas that have most flexible hours, if you have care needs that you have at home. So I think the care system is actually forcing, childcare support is actually forcing people into roles too, that you know, you realized it more when the schools were shut down and the daycares were shut down due to the pandemic, how big the challenge had gotten. But I think that that's an area where targeted support can really change the dynamics of and open up opportunities.
I think that one of the, I just actually posted something about this on my LinkedIn. I think one of the ironies of the pandemic, it has shown the U.S. education system not to be about, you know, preparing kids for the workforce of the future, but basically someplace for women to leave their kids so that they can go to work. You know, that's almost what the pandemic has revealed. The whole school system, it really functions. You know, the function it really serves.
Let me just share, if I could, Stephen. We do have an event on the calendar on June 9th. If people remember from our Impact conference, Tracy Edwards, she had this mating factor. And part of it is really starting as early as you can to let girls know that they can have these career choices and routes. And she's going to be part of a deep dive that we'll do to share her journey, literally around the world journey, and other spin-offs of that.
Mark, to your point on impact and women in the workforce, there's a book called Project Drawdown written by Paul Hawkins. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but it kind of outlines some of the major, you know, initiatives and projects that we could undertake in order to reverse climate change. And one of the more interesting ones was educating and empowering women in the workforce, because when you do that, they kind of tend to, you know, focus more on their career and have less of a, you know, they don't have as large of families, and just in terms of population growth, it tends to slow down in a lot of developing nations. And really interestingly, you know, we tend to then use less natural resources. And so I thought that was such an interesting comment and you know, initiative that he was talking about.
And she posts that in the chat. But even better, you get a beer if you post it in the app, Joe. David,
On it.
Kuntal?
Yeah. No, so I just had some comment from Indian jurisdiction. I think there has been some very dedicated and focused attention by government on variety of front to ensure that the women will get some special treatment, whether it is to do with the free education or whether it is to do their rights to get employment. I think we have also seen that now there has been some major policy announcements where they have ensured that even on the listed company platform, there are requirements that you must have women independent directors. And historically, we have seen that by and large, the philosophy of the Indian family, especially the ones which are in middle class and high middle class arena, is that they would want the daughter to study, and they have encouraged them to take up any profession of their choice. And I think the results are out there. You know, when I heard some comments that, you know, you have many engineers from India, many women who are into workforce also from India. So I think it's working, but there is more to be achieved in India as far as the parity between women and men is concerned.
Other thoughts, questions?
Mark, this is Alina. Sorry, my video doesn't work, but I have an idea.
Okay.
Many years back, when I had the pleasure to study for an executive MBA in Sweden from all the countries, one class we were told that the politics are getting less and less powerful, while the CEOs and the corporations are getting more and more powerful. And therefore, we see a transition that more and more women are allowed into politics. And as a young girl, I was sitting there and I was commented, and you know, it's the same with restaurants. The top line restaurants and Michelin restaurants have mostly men serving. So it's, again, the service industry. While in diners, you see more women. Oh, thank you.
Alina's on the call, by the way.
Exactly. And progress have been made. Politics, corporations, investors are pushing the envelope to have more women. I have two thoughts when it comes to this, because it was in the news so much. The number one is women. This is not me. Mark, that's not me.
No, I know. I was just pointing out there too, Alina. So keep going.
Okay. There is a name for that. We have the same name. Anyway, so women are not incentivized to help other women. As long as we say the first woman, the last woman, the only Asian woman, the only Black woman, we don't incentivize women to bring other women into the game. That is one thing. And the other thing that
I'd like to tokenize incentives for our community to incentivize you to do that.
Exactly. Well, that's another idea I was thinking about. And the other thing that I think that we should address and we should tap into is the pool of women that want to do something, but they don't get the chance.
So Alina, let that question comment. Let's pause on that and reflect on it.
I know exactly.
We're going to cover that right here and in spades. But I wanted to, before we start, I asked Simon if I could steal a few minutes, well, just to set the stage for, like, many people are new to our communities, to let people know, I mean, this is not a one-off. This is a part of a tradition. You know, we definitely have goals, which we'll talk about. But who is 361 Firm? Just, you know, briefly, it's a platform for not only family offices, but thought leaders. As we collaborate, we try to navigate global investment landscapes as well as philanthropy, and particularly an impact. We've done tons of events in 55 cities, 20 countries, now Zooms. We've got a great community of engaged people who are, you know, again, doing that navigation. We're rather deal junkies. We lean towards funds, but we'll look at deals, but also want to help those companies and philanthropies with strategic advisors. Again, we've been going around the world. We're supposed to be doing our second Asia tour, but we had COVID. The history being the one firms from Arthur Andersen when I was a partner. The roundtables are what I've been doing for my college and law school. Just how I think is smart. Yeah, we're setting up basically roundtables to address what first family offices, but really a lot of investors are looking for: deals, capital for their deals, talent, having a great network, whether it's just for business partnerships or investing. This is sort of the part of the crystal ball that Simon Vine has been leading a series of deep dives. Soon we want to have fun again in person, so we'll come back to that later. And then, but also, you know, this legacies part is sort of a 360, you know, diagnostic, having been in a family office for 8 years. Like you said, I was in Russia for 8 winters and a family office for 8 years. Quite two different types of experiences, but at the very end, it's all, as sometimes it helps telling my kids, we're all going to die. Let's make the most of it. So, but really, for these families, it's about that legacy, that impact, and how we want to help the world. And then we organize ourselves in these various groups. This is like the future of work, but it touches all these groups interconnect. And so in today's social media silos, we're the opposite of that. And then we also come from the alumni tradition, that our community is not just investors. We really want to bring thought leaders and managers and collaborate. We do events like Thursday on the virus. We make ourselves smarter, like what's happening. Dave was talking about India, new technologies, new investment opportunities as well. We'll be doing some things in Ohio soon and Michigan. I'm a rare person from Ohio went to Michigan, but I can't wait to go around the world again. But these Zooms have been great to bring together our community. So I think I just hit a video, but the video I do want to hit is one, and it's this one. It's just 1 minute just so you understand who we are.